Welcome to another episode of the Svarim Chatter podcast. I'm Nachi Weinstein. This episode of the podcast is sponsored in honor of Yoel Horowitz for his passion in learning and spreading the Torah of Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch. To sponsor an episode or to support the podcast, please email me svarimchatter@gmail.com or check out the link and information in the show notes. You can also find a link in the show notes to subscribe to the Svarim Chatter WhatsApp community where I post new books, new Svarim, book deals, and so on, as well as a link to join the Svarim Chatter WhatsApp status if you prefer to see things like that on a status. And finally, you can please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Especially, you can rate and review on Apple, if you have Apple Podcasts, or if you use 24/6 or Spotify or wherever it is, if you can please subscribe to the podcast. With that, enjoy this episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Svarim Chatter podcast. On this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be joined by Dr. Elliot Bondi, and we'll be discussing Rav Samson Hirsch and the foundation and the work of the foundation that I'm sure many listeners are familiar with, the many publications that have been published and that are still being worked on and being published all the time about from, Rav Hirsch and Breuer and the family and so on. So thank you, Dr. Bondi, for joining me.
Hey, I'm Elliot Bondi. I'm originally from Baltimore. I'm a physician. I head the pulmonary critical care division of Brookdale Hospital. I've been practicing for more than 50 years. I'm the grandson of Rabbi Breuer and have grown up with the Hirschian traditions. I'm old enough that I speak German fluently. Therefore, I was very close to Rabbi Breuer, whose language was German, and my parents brought me, even as a young child, very often to Washington Heights, and therefore I became very close to Rabbi Breuer. That's just a way of introduction. This is why I'm able to understand the very difficult German of Hirsch, which to the modern German-speaking person, you will lose the nuances and the references which he makes, unless one is familiar with the German, the High German of the 1800s. Anyway, I was always interested in writing, and even in high school, I edited a newsletter for the class, which was really Divrei Torah, and I continued. I actually started to give shiurim when I was in my youth, and even in my residency training, which was at Einstein, I used to give on Shabbos, alternating with Rabbi Tendler's son, Yaakov Tendler. We alternated giving the shiurim on Shabbos afternoon, which really was, we were both darshanim. And this continued. And when Rav Breuer passed away, we took it upon ourselves to bring out into English that which had not yet been done. So let me begin with a story of the Hirsch publications. The Hirsch published, if one thinks about it, he didn't publish that much. He published when he was 24 years old. He published when he was 28. He published the 19 letters, followed right away by Chorev, and that was followed by a sort of a polemic against Torah Shabbal Peh, which was called Naftule Niftalti, my struggle, to combat the very strong reform which began at the time. But his main work was Chorev and 19 Letters, and he actually, when he was still young, in 1834, he was born in 1808. He stopped writing major works, little articles he wrote, but he stopped writing because he was so involved with his communal work as the Rav of Nikolsburg, which was a huge kehillah, and he was very much involved with the struggles which the Jewish community had in maintaining their freedom. And it was a period of much struggle. At that time, Moravia was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he was a member of the parliament or called to the parliament in a period of political unrest at the time. Anyway, he had the calling to Frankfurt, which was another challenge. And in Frankfurt, he started a journal, the Yeshurim, which he published from 1854 to 1870, so 16 years. And in the Yeshurim, he used that as his forum for his scholarly works and also for his ideological, shall we say, works. And the Yeshurim was written really on a very high level, and he wrote not only for his time, but he was really writing for posterity. The Chumash he then published after, essentially towards the end of his publication of Yeshurim, he published the Chumash. It went from 1867 to 1878. There are 5 volumes, and so it took him time to do it. And it's striking that we still have his original manuscript, and it's always been noted that it's there are so few corrections. He thought so well before he wrote it. When he finished the Chumash, he then did the Tehillim, and then just 3 years before his death, he wrote his commentary to Mishlei, which is really it's called Thoughts of Mishlei, but it's really a commentary. And he then he published, or rather he wrote his commentary to the Siddur. This was, he passed away before it was published. And his son-in-law did all the proof work and that put it together, but it was his own work. And that's the gamut of what he published. So after his death, his son, who was an attorney, he put together all of his articles from the Yeshurim, which he had written, which comprised the collected writings of Rav Hirsch, in German, Gesammelte Schriften. This was only published 12 years after his death, and they really did not leave out anything except for really dated articles which had appeared in various places. They also included, he had written certain articles for different events which were published. They put them all, those which were all worthwhile, they put them together in these collected writings. Anyway, the Hirsch publications were confined to Germany until Hirsch himself had met Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector. He was very, very encouraging to him for publication. One must remember that with distance, Hirsch had really very little communication with Rabbonim of the East. And in Germany, where he was well known, he was really close to Rav Hildesheimer, who really they supported each other, and it's only a modern phenomenon which seems to indicate that there was a rift between Hildesheimer and Hirsch. It's important to know that this is not accurate at all. This really began after Hirsch, in that and like we see all over, a castigation of Hildesheimer as being what we would call today modern, which is really very incorrect. The difference is just a matter of perception, which Rav Hirsch was very much against the concept of the science of Judaism. The reform at the time, which was they tried to base themselves on a firm basis for reforming, did that by studying Judaism from a historical perspective, and halacha not as the Masorah, the Torah Sheba'al Peh, as our bedrock of how we live, but they felt that Judaism had just evolved following psychological norms, historical norms, scientific norms, following sociological norms, not based on Masorah, but based on, shall we say, as they called it, science and reason. And they would learn a Gemara not based on what Chazal say, but on the times, and trying to understand that they were just adapting to what situations were not al pi Masorah, but rather based on the times. This was called the science of Judaism, which Hirsch was adamantly opposed to, as everybody was. Hildesheimer, who came from Hungary, from Eisenstadt, where he was well known as a Goro, Hildesheimer utilized secular studies only for learning. It's essentially the same as Torah Decheretz, and that you're not compromising in knowing the world. And Hildesheimer would to prove not prove, but in understanding learning, he would, if good speech, proper education was worthwhile, he considered it worthwhile. So it was that nuance that he officially in the yeshiva, they didn't have, there was no study of archaeology to prove how a halacha developed, etc., etc. It was not the science of Judaism. However, he was criticized later on in the 1900s. He was long gone for that. Striking is that who were his successors? There was David C. Hoffman, who nobody would question, and there was a Kaplan who passed away young, and above all, Rabbi Weinberg, And Rabbi Breuer considered Rabbi Chiel Weinberg one of the greatest Hirschians, and so did Rabbi Chiel Weinberger himself. He wrote extensively on Hirsch in saying that this is the way to go. He felt very strongly. So it's important to understand this. This is a modern castigation, just like they really criticize Hirsch, but they just don't say so. Anyway, this controversy is very much held today, and it really affected when Rabbi Chiel Weinberg tried to bring the Hildesheimer seminary, rabbinical seminary. That was its name, and as everybody knows, it was forbidden by the Gedolei Eretz Yisrael to bring it to Israel, and he did not leave Berlin, and Rabbi Breuer tried to bring his yeshiva to Eretz Yisrael. He just couldn't get any visas. He could not do it. But Chiel Weinberger had it done. But the Gedolim didn't let him because of this castigation of Hildesheimer Seminary. It really a tragedy. It's a major footnote to history. Okay, so Hirsch, his successors, his children, they published the collected writings. A rabbi in Lita, Rabbi Aronson, in 1892, he published a Hebrew version of Chorev. This had the Haskama of Reb Chaim Ozer Brzezinski, who wrote at the time in 1893 very prophetically that this work is not complete until the Chumash is brought into Lashon HaKodesh, because he said that this is so important. So this is from in Lita, and the Chorev in Hebrew was reprinted several times. The 19 letters were translated by Rabbi Drachman here in New York. In 1898, Rabbi Drachman, was the pioneer of Hirsch's introduction to America. Those were the only two Hirschian publications before World War II, which came out in other than German. And Hirsch was essentially not too well known in America. Forget about it. But even in Europe, Gedolim knew who he was. It was known that he had this shitta, which nobody properly understood, and that he said one can participate in the modern world. The Aguda, which the Aguda is really an outgrowth of Hirsch's own organization, which he made in Germany, called the Free Union for the Interests of Orthodoxy, which was very, very successful for the all the Rabbonim of Germany were members of it, and Mr. Rosenheim, who was a member of the Frankfurt Kehillah, was so enthused with the success of this organization that with the spread of Zionism as a, shall we say, political force in Eastern Europe, and what was happening was that the reform started to spread through this, people wanting to break away from the extreme economic situation which affected so many people, and the majority of people. And the Aguda was he formulated it based on what Hirsch had done in Germany, and he made a union of the Rabbonim and then the communities, which culminated in its founding at Katowice in 1911, at which the two main speakers were Hirsch's son-in-law, Rabbi Breuer, Shlomo Breuer, and the Ger Rebbe. And the Ger Rebbe the Ger Rebbe is a very famous story that the Ger Rebbe told Rabbi Schwab, who had asked him about what his opinion is of Rabbi Hirsch's Shitta. The Ger Rebbe said, Kol asher tomar Soro shema b'kola. Listen to what Soro tells you. Soro is Samson Raphael Hirsch. And that's all he told him. The Aguda was not based on Hirsch, did not take Hirsch's ideology as its own. There was much excitement over it, whether one takes Torah Decharetz or not, etc., etc. But the respect for Hirsch really became spread through the Agudas, spreading through the masses where most Jews lived, who were in Eastern Europe. However, of course, the war came. This was all for naught. People did not worry about ideology or hashkafa, etc. at that time. With the war, the immigration went to Israel and here, and to most of it here and in England. Rabbi Breuer, who had come here from Frankfurt in 1939, recognized that Hirsch was very necessary for this country and for Eretz Yisrael, and it's a real credit to Rabbi Schwab, who then he was a very young man, visited Rabbi Breuer, and after his visit, he was, this is in 1939-40, he was inspired to write into Hebrew a introduction to just the first chapter of Bereshis, which is a huge chapter in Hirsch, in Hebrew, and he called it Shemesh Marpeh. Okay, it's not the same as the book, as the Sefer, which is today, but he called it Shemesh Marpeh, that Hirsch's Torah is a healing sun. This is during the war for our people, and since there was nothing in English, and he wrote it in Hebrew, really to appeal to everywhere. Very small book. It's the first thing the newly founded Feldheim publishers, Mr. Feldheim, understood the historic importance of this, and he published it. And it's a very thin sefer, hardly known. It's redundant today because one has the regular, so it's really not known. And Rabbi Schwab, just as a footnote, I was very close with Rabbi Schwab, so I know these things. So Rabbi Breuer had written also a similar book in German as an introduction to Hirsch. People would love it today because it's like a little paragraph on what Hirsch writes 20 pages on. But a little thing which he had written it for students in Germany, and he had it published by Feldheim right after the war, called Introduction to the Chumash, and he only did Bereshis. It was just Bereshis and Shemos. Also, didn't get very far, but it was something. In England, another grandson of Hirsch, Isaac Levy, who was, it's of interest, Hirsch had twin daughters. His youngest children were twin daughters. One married Shlomo Breuer, and who became Hirsch's successor. And one married a man from England, a Mr. Levy, who was of Russian background. And Mr. Levy was wanted his children to learn German so that they could read the Hirsch. And he sent his sons to the Frankfurt Yeshiva to learn. And so they became fluent in German, and obviously learned there for several years, and became familiar with the Hirschian writings and the milieu of being in Frankfurt. And Isaac Levy, one son, became a dentist and spent his time translating the Hirsch really for himself and for his children. And he his manuscript, he had typed it out, and in those days you didn't have Xerox machines or copiers, so he had copy paper, carbon paper, which they used to use, and he typed it out, and he had this manuscript which he used to for his children. He kept it quiet. His brother was the Rabbi Yeshaya Levy, was a rabbi of Oev Tzedek here in Manhattan, and he was very, in other words, a grandson of Hirsch. He was the rabbi together with Rabbi Hillel Klein, who was also the rabbi of that shul, who was the son-in-law of Mendel Hirsch. So his wife was the grandchild of Hirsch. So there were two cousins who were the Rabbonim in Oev Tzedek. And Klein was much older. Klein comes from Hirsch's oldest child, and Levy was from Hirsch's youngest child, and there was like a 20-year difference. So this was the old rabbi and the young rabbi. Anyway, Isaac Levy had this manuscript. 1955, there was a part of the reparations, German reparations, for the war, which had been negotiated by the American government. They gave a $5 million grant to the Leo Beck Institute, which hardly exists anymore, but they gave to them for the preservation of German Jewish culture, and nothing was given for Torah publications. And Rabbi Breuer heard of this, and through whatever people they applied, I should mention until then is that remember the period of time during the war, after the war, for Orthodox things, there was very little support. Every effort was made just for the building of the Kehillah, of the yeshivas, etc., Eretz Yisrael. This was a different time. There was no excess funds. Anything which was there was used not for publications, which seemed to be a little bit less important if one thinks about it. But Rabbi Breuer never, tried his best. When he heard of the Claims Commission, they got a grant from them to publish on the condition that there was a ready-made manuscript. But he knew about Levy. So Levy's manuscript was used right away. And this was the first Hirsch. And it was printed in England and copyrighted by the predecessor to Samson Press, regardless. Really just before that, the Chorev of Hebrew was was reprinted. This Feldheim did that as the other major contribution. And with the appearance of the Chumash, then Diane Grunfeld in England, who was a shall we call a Hirsch scholar, he translated the Chorev into English. He included the introduction to the Chorev, which is 150 pages, is really his doctoral thesis that was included in it, and it's a monumental work in and of itself. Then Jacob Breuer, Rabbi Breuer's son, he retranslated the 19 letters at the behest of Feldheim, because nobody could read Drachman's English, which was 1890s English, and it was very difficult. Now, the Hirschian works were around. The problem was that Levy's Chumash, the English of the Chumash, was a bit archaic, and he did a tremendous thing. Because of Levy, there's a Chumash around, but it was difficult to read. Chorev, which is written very well, however, that too is written in British, very old English, and it is very Germanic in style, with very long sentences. And Jacob Breuer then, how should we say, modernized the 19 letters, and that was extremely successful. That was a key in what he wrote. And Jacob Breuer then took some of the Chumash and some things from the collected writings, some things from Tehillim, and wrote something called Timeless Torah, a big volume to bring other Hirsch writings to the public in modern English. Today it's redundant, so it doesn't exist anymore. And they wrote a book called Fundamentals of Judaism, which also took from different authors works on Hirsch, which were written in a modern idiom. Again, there was very little support for new publications. The one which came out, however, was the Tehillim, which took many years, and this was done by the first professional translator, who was Gertrude Hirschler. Gertrude Hirschler, she deserves much credit. She was a great granddaughter of Rabbi Kiva Eger, great whatever, and she was. As a result, they were related to the Sofer family, from the Sam Sofer family, and she lived in Baltimore and was actually the first woman to receive a degree from Hopkins night school, which is all that she could go to in English. Although she was from Vienna, and she came here as a 10-year-old, and eventually went to finish Hopkins, and then her first translation was a little booklet by Rabbi Breuer on the Jewish marriage, which he did in 1955 or something like that, and it was so well done. They suggested to her, she was very close to Rabbi Schwab, and she lived in Washington Heights, and Jacob Breuer, again, Rabbi Breuer's son, he sort of recruited her to do a translation of the Tehillim. And her editor was Rabbi Tendler. who at that time lived in Washington Heights, and he helped her. And also Rabbi Heinemann of Baltimore, his father also helped her, and she brought out the Tehillim, which was the first publication which was well written and understandable. She then followed that with the Hirsch Siddur, which she did, and out of modesty, her name doesn't appear in the first edition. She didn't want to be known as the translator. And Gertie Hirsch passed away without family, with nobody, and she's really remembered through her writings. That's her eternity, and that's what it says in her Matzeba. She then she published many. She became a master translator, all because of the Tehillim work which she had done. When Breuer passed away during the Shiva, his sons made up their minds that they must continue his work by publishing the gamut of the Hirsch publications. At first, the intent was that they would bring out Breuer's commentaries to Yirmiyahu and Yecheskel. They expanded that to the other Sifrei Nach, which had been done by Hirsch's, should we say, successors in the publication field. And this included all of Yoshua, Shoftim, Shmuel, Lochim, Yeshaya, Yecheskel, Yirmiyahu, all the way around, and Trei Osar. They had also done Ezra and Nehemiah and the 5 Megillas. The only thing which Hirsch himself had done Tehillim and had written on Mishlei, and the only ones which were not part were Eov, Daniel, and Divrei Hayomim. That was never done. So the intent was to form a foundation to publish. Now, in Germany, the publications were all done by the Samson Raphael Hirsch Publication Society in Germany, which was composed of Rabbi Breuer, Joseph Breuer from here, one of the Rabbonim from France, Reb Chaim Yosef Sonnenfeld of Yerushalayim, the famous Sonnenfeld. He was a part of the Frankfurt Hirsch Publication Society. He was such a strong supporter of Hirsch. And also a Rav from Lithuania, Rabbi Hershowitz, who eventually ended up in Yerushalayim. And they had brought out reprints, etc., of Hirsch in Germany. In America, when Rabbi Breuer came here, he, for the few publications which were done, he made a Hirsch Publication Society here. It was composed of Rabbi Breuer and Mr. Rosenheim, who had been here, Samson Raphael Weiss, who was at that time in Detroit, eventually worked with the OU, and Rabbi Schwab was part of it, and Rabbi Goldstein, Herbert Goldstein from Westside Institutional Synagogue, who was a big supporter of Hirsch. They had this society, which publication society, which as time went on became moribund. They had absolutely no funding, and it was just there. During the Shiva, they decided that since that publication society, it was moribund, and rather than make them it wasn't well organized. They made a formal foundation to do these publications. About 3 months later, in Rabbi Breuer's desk was a note which was found, which he said that the publications should all come out. That's his wish. America, or in English, and then underlined, and in Eretz Yisrael. And this was very important after we organized blah, blah, blah. And then I went with my cousin, Dr. David Beckhofer, to Mr. Feldheim, the same Mr. Feldheim who had published in 1940. And we went to his little office on the Lower East Side, on 2 East Broadway. And we came to him, and we didn't say a word. He said, "Finally, you've come to me. I'm waiting to do whatever you give me, and I will take care of it." He said, "This is my Chov Kodosh." From there, none of us knew anything about publishing or translating or anything. But we decided to bring out at first to do the commentary first of Rabbi Breuer on Yirmiyahu. And we went through, actually had to go through different translators to find somebody who would understand the German properly. And that was one. But our first real project was to do the collected writings, because these were all in German and not hardly anything except for what Jacob Breuer had done in Timeless Torah. And these are the bulk of Hirsch's ideology, what everybody talks about. And so I must interject a second that Grunfeld had written Judaism Eternal, which was part of the collected writings, just excerpts of it. And excellent work, but it too was in difficult German, difficult English. So we decided to before we really tackle the Chumash itself, which will be later, we first wanted to check that we can do it, and we did the collected writings. So we did them over from 1980. We began in 81, and we finished it in 95, something like that. We brought out 8 volumes, and this really opened up Hirsch very much, and we know that from where it went, and from there we then decided to do the Chumash over again. By the time we did the Chumash, there were no translators who were professional, who understood the old German. There was hardly anybody left. So through Feldheim, we found Rabbi Haberman in Yerushalayim, who a lawyer by training, who made Aliyah to Israel in the Yom Kippur War, and a master writer. He took the Hebrew Chumash and worked with that based on the German, since every sentence I went over comparing to the German, and he made the Chumash, which is probably more accurate than the German. because the German, obviously, everything has always little mistakes and typos, etc. And today, after 7 reprints, including 7 new editions, in other words, corrected from, we still find little things which just have to be, the nuances get lost, but nothing major. So we did the collected writings and the Chumash, and once we had done at the same time Yirmiyahu, we did Yecheskel. Each of them took years to do. Again, whatever was done, we had to edit. And Rabbi Breuer has a daughter who is, Baruch Hashem, still alive, and she is 99. And she used to translate, but she always insisted that somebody has to go over her, and which we've done. But she's still active in helping us. And her biggest skill is really in proofreading and picking up little things. And but she's a great help, though. In the end, I have the responsibility, which I do. We did, after we've completed the Chumash, Rabbi Perlau, Novominster, at the same time, actually on the same day, it's striking. It came to us and requested that the Chumash be placed into Lashon HaKodesh. The original Hebrew Chumash was written as a kiruv work in modern academic Hebrew, and it's very difficult for the average Israeli yeshiva bocher to understand. And both Feldheim and the Novominster asked us to put it into Hebrew, and Rabbi Breuer had asked the same thing, because he had felt that the Hebrew edition, which had been made in the 70s, was also very hard to understand. So we took it upon ourselves to do that. We have a staff in Yerushalayim who did the Chumash and Tehillim, Mishlei, and they completed the collected writings and are now doing all the Sifrei Tanakh. We've completed in English all the Sifrei Tanakh, which I mentioned before. The last one to be done, the Shmuel, came out last week, and the last one to be done is Melachim, which hopefully within the year will come out, and that would complete our English work. And the Chumash has been completed in Hebrew, as I said, Tehillim and Mishlei, and they've completed Yeshaya, and the other Sifrei Tanakh are in the pipeline. It goes much quicker in Hebrew than in English, and because the hard work has been done already in English. So it's a matter of translation and just making sure it's accurate. But the foundation then has our real work is in Lashon HaKodesh, and it's been very, very well received in Israel. So much so that we had to make a pocket edition of the Chumash in both English and Hebrew, just by people want that. And now we came out with a pocket edition of Tehillim. Again, this just reflects that Rabbi Breuer's role, that the Hirsch works should be spread and be made accessible, has borne fruit in its acceptance. The last thing that the foundation then is really just devoted to the publications, which we obviously do not do for financial gain. That's not the purpose, and it is really the credit of Feldheim and the old Philip Feldheim and his son Yaakov, who is now retired, who lived in Israel, who has been of immense help to us in the past, and now his brother Yitzchak Feldheim and his nephew Eli Meir Hollander, who have been just supportive and have really worked for us l'shem u'l'tiferes. Really, I want to close with just something which may interest some. When we published the new Hebrew Chumash, the Feldheim, this was Yaakov Feldheim, Mr. Feldheim's son, said we need to have a haskoma. Now, we never have a haskoma in any of the Hirsch books. He didn't have a haskoma. Who am I to give a haskoma? Or anybody. And no haskoma. And Feldheim said that in Israel, in the Haredi world, you can't publish without a haskoma. So he'll get a haskoma first. So he went to three people, I shouldn't say names, and real big, major figures next to him, who said, okay, they'll write something. And fine. One of them, for some reason, had visited Chaim Kanievsky and told him that he's giving a haskoma to this Hirsch Chumash. Didn't think that Chaim would even react. So he said, "Und ich? And me? No one asked me." So he said, this one said, "If you want to do it?" He said, "Yeah." So this man called Feldheim and said, "Listen, Chaim said he would like to write a Vichta Brocha, that's all." So he said, if he writes, I don't want to write. And the other two said also, no, if he writes, that's enough, we don't have to. So the Gabbai called me and said that Chaim wants to write, but he has a condition, that he's giving it to a Talmud, and a close Talmud, with whom he learns every day. And he wants him to go over it, and if there's something which he does not like, we have to take it out. And or he won't write, because he will only give something, he'll only write it if it's checked. So they said, this is a little bit dangerous, because Hirsch, his philosophy, his hashkafa may not be what Chaim wants to give his name to. But of course, how could we say no? So I said, okay. And he said that he's not to be paid. This man, the Talmud, who's going to essentially proofread the entire Chumash, because he doesn't want it. It's being done for him. He mustn't pay him. So the Talmud, it was a major role, came back with 20 improvements. That's what I have to say. That he said, say this, this phrase is better said this way. He did not find one thing which he could correct. Reb Chaim had one request that in brackets we put in when Hirsch discussed Hilchos Shmita last week. that, and he quotes the Rambam, and Reb Chaim said, there's a diuk on the Rambam which today we don't follow, and he said, just put in brackets yesh cholkim. Just nothing. He said, please put that in there because today people, they'll see this, they'll worry that there's nothing to do with Hirsch. He just asked, so of course we did that. So, and then Reb Chaim wrote a two-liner in which he just writes that gives a bracha because his father, the Stipler, had written, then we understood why he wrote that if you want to know Das Torah among the Achronim, ayin b'kisrei Rav Hirsch. So he said, and the Stipler said, and see what Reb Chaim Ozer wrote in the Hebrew 1893 edition of Chorev, in which he said that it should come out, it's so important that it come out in Lashon HaKodesh. And so Reb Chaim requested that we reprint the Haskama of Reb Chaim Ozer. That's what we did. And it's really I actually went to thank him for writing that, which took about 3 seconds, but he remembered exactly. And I felt so, I didn't want to take his time, so we were there for exactly 3 seconds. And then he spoke for a minute about something else to the person I went with, and the Talmud was there. And of course we gave the Talmud but he doesn't know that it came from us because I had to keep my word. But and actually the Talmud went over the entire, without question, he went over Tehillim in Hebrew and he went over the collected writings in Hebrew. Never found anything. So that's what we're doing, and we continue our work. And as the goal, I should preface say one thing is that actually one of the works was put into French because of the demand in France for the Hirschian Torah. Somebody in Eretz Yisrael had written what we call in English a Hirsch anthology, but he took 240 topics of Hirsch and put it in a short, the kind which people like today, just concise. And they did that. It was called Be'er Hasar in Hebrew, Hirsch anthology in English, and the French wanted that. So somehow I was able to do it in French. Feldheim published it too, and through a French subsidiary. But anyway, that's the story.
Amazing. I'll just add a couple of things. So you said the newest volume that came out was someone I think in the Berlin Seminary. It wasn't even one of the family, one of the relatives. Is that accurate?
Okay, so the newest volume is by Rabbi Pinchas Wolf, and he was it's written very carefully in the introduction. He was apparently must have been quite brilliant as the Talmud of Rav David Tzvi Hoffman, and he then became the dayan for Rabbi Azraeli Auerbach in Halberstadt, and he was such a good dayan, and he was unmarried, and Rabbi Auerbach took him as a son-in-law. When he got married, he needed a parnasa. He wasn't going to stay with his father-in-law as a dayan, and he went to Frankfurt, where he became part of the Breuer circle. And when they were discussing who writes what, he had written a commentary to Hirsch's Mishlei. He expanded on it. So he was very much into the Hirschian way of interpretation that was called Iyun in the Mishle, something like that. And he published that, and then he became the Rav of what's called the Talmud Torah in Cologne, where he was really just a Marbitz Torah. It wasn't really a shul. It was programs for learning, and he also was in charge of Limud Torah for 32 surrounding communities. A very active person, and he also wrote a commentary on Shmuel, which was based on the Hirschian derech. So he fit in with the others, and that's what he took, and that's what he published. And that's why I emphasize so much that one mustn't label people. And he came to Eretz Yisrael, and he came with a manuscript from Elohim, but this manuscript was because in Israel he built a community in Petach Tikva, which is still thriving. But he never could publish the manuscript. His son, about 3 years ago, gave it to a Swiss publisher who publishes in German, and he had published Shmuel, which had appeared in Germany. The Swiss publisher just took the old German and just today you can scan everything, and it's easy to. And so he could change the Gothic to normal print that people can read, because they need that in today. There's a market still of German because of the number of Jews living in Germany. There are 100,000 Jews in Germany. And so he published all the Hirschian books in new copies in German. And so the son of Rabbi Wolf gave him the manuscript, and he published it. And the Swiss publisher brought it out, and when I saw that, I wanted to have it too. And this would complete everything. However, I needed permission from the family to take a translation, but there was no family to be found. And the shul still exists, and they're apparently relatives, but they gave over the rights to the Swiss publisher. And the Swiss publisher, he felt, this is our Botzes HaTorah, so he gave us permission. So it's very interesting. I actually had the chus to see this man once. He had come here once, and he visited Rabbi Breuer, and I saw him.
A couple other things to mention. So first of all, you mentioned also Rabbi Drachman and his translation of 19 letters, the old translation. So first of all, just if anyone ever wants anything fascinating to read, his memoir, The Unfailing Life, Memoirs of an American Rabbi, Rabbi Drachman, is fascinating. But also, as you mentioned, Rav Hirsch's introduction in English to the American world was through Rabbi Drachman, who was a graduate of the Breslau Seminary, which Rav Hirsch famously had a very public disagreement with Zechariah Frankel, which is just interesting to note. That's all.
No, it's interesting to note. You have to be Breslau. Rabbi Breuer always told me that there were some people who came from there who remained as strong people, and he himself was let me back off. The Reform at the time, people went to learn, and they kept their perspective. And they were able to navigate the difficulties, and that's why Hirsch was so upset with Breslau, because he felt that they were that the poor people who had been there were unable to withstand the onslaught against them, but there were some. For example, the rabbi of Rotterdam, I forgot his name, was considered a Godel, and Rabbi Schwab's predecessor in Baltimore was from Breslau. and his name was Rabbi Schaffer. Okay, and he had been in Baltimore 44 years before Rabbi Schwab came, and he was unquestionable. But he was from Breslau, so you make a very good point that there were some people who remained firm. Okay, doesn't excuse them that they went there, but it's not a blemish on them because they proved their honesty. These were Uraim.
And my understanding, just from reading Drachman's memoirs, that he grew up either in a traditional or reform type of family, and he actually became from, and he went to Breslau, which was conservative.
Right.
Yeah. So also, other things to mention here at the end is that I don't know if we mentioned Pirkei Avos at all, which is in Hebrew and English of Rav Hirsch. Pirkei Avos, Masechtas Avos. I don't know if we mentioned of Rav Hirsch.
Pirkei Avos was written in the Siddur,
and then they took it out and they made it into a separate publication.
Hirsch published the Pirkei Avos because he had written the Siddur, so he published before it was printed. He published the Pirkei Avos following the Mishlei. The Mishlei was all in a journal called the New Yeshurim. He had stopped making the Yeshurim in 1870, and in 1882 or 3, his son started a new journal called the New Yeshua. And so Hirsch he had finished the Siddur, and he put the Pirkei Avos before it was published in there. So the Pirkei Avos is just that was a commercial thing to make it fit at the time. In reality, they didn't have the funds, even here, to make the whole Siddur yet, so they just made the Pirkei Avos, and the Siddur came later.
And of course, there's Rabbi Breuer. You have his sermons and Piyutim, I think. Right? There's a number of publications from Breuer as well.
I did. That's all we did. That.
You didn't mention those. I just wanted to throw those out there. That those are also here.
We did a lot of things. We did Shlomo Breuer's speeches, which was very popular. It went through several printings. We did Breuer's Divrei Yosef, which is the halachic. It's really a Shabbos Kodesh and Shabbos Shuvah droshos. These are all the things which we've done.
I'm just going to mention, and I'll leave it here, that the crowning jewel would be, and the world needs a revised, redone Choref, but for now there still is that. I have to mention that.
No, you make a very important point, and I've tried that. You see, Choref is not from Feldheim. It's
Correct. From
Judaica Press, and they have tried, and we have tried, but the family of Diane Grunfeld do not want it to be changed. They did it in Hebrew. In Hebrew, they put it into modern Hebrew, and the Hebrew edition of Chorev, which was done by Mordechai Breuer, has been so far through, I think, 6 editions in a matter of a few years. But technically, we could take the Hebrew, but we can't do that. So this is you bring up a very good point, but this is something which will, with time.
That's Hashem one day, because I don't think anyone really reads Choref today. It's too hard.
That's
and it really must, Rav Hirsch's crown jewel, it must be redone and revised for the public. I'll say that. And also, you bring up another thing that I forgot to mention, that so the Hebrew Chumash today, like you said, there's the new Hebrew and you have the new English. You also have the Israeli, the Ivrit version through Mossad Breuer, Karen Breuer, what do they call it in Israel, with the black cover. So there's 2 different Hebrew ones today.
And that one has the new one is really is the one which is used, and in fact, this too was a very difficult thing, and the Mossad Yitzhak Royer, they themselves acknowledged that their Hebrew was too hard, and they this was a very delicate matter, and not to go say anything against them, and but it's clear that the new Chumash just made it accessible. That's what one has to do.
Okay, so the many Hirsch publications that the Foundation publishes are available in Tzarim stores. They're available on Feldheim's website. I'll link to the website. Anyone interested can purchase there, of course. But many Hirsch's Tzarim and books are available everywhere. So thank you, Dr. Bondi, for joining me.